Hello everyone, welcome to Liam's Lyceum. I'm your host, Liam, aka Hembar, and today I have a special video for you. This is more philological than most of my other literary works, uh, videos I have on this channel. But if you stuck around for a while, you've noticed I put philology videos up here, generally in the form of poetry. But today I have a special one for you, as I had to do a project for a class. Okay, so I am a grad student, and I am currently taking a class on the Gothic language. Now, Gothic, uh, that term these days denotes a lot of things, right? I mean, you have Gothic architecture, and you've got the scripts, and you got the subculture, and you got the novel, and you got the language and the people, right? And that's the original one, actually, is this Gothic language and people, and that's what the class is about, right? We don't have much written in Gothic. Tolkien did actually write a poem in Gothic. It's called Bach me Bloma. I recorded that actually a couple months ago. But today I wanted to share my little presentation that I did for class actually. So I thought it'd be fun to translate something from English into Gothic, and what better than the Castle of Otranto, which by Horace Walpole, which is the first Gothic novel. For those unaware, Gothic novels are called that because they're set in Gothic architecture, essentially, right? It is old, scary. They're kind of precursors of the horror genre. This came out in 1764, I believe. But and it goes right along with this sack of Rome picture we have in the back, um, which is, of course, a rather famous painting by Joseph Silvestre from 1890, which he calls it the sack of Rome in 410 by the barbarians. But this is actually the Visigoths, led by Alaric, the king of the Visigoths at the time. And they sacked Rome, which was quite a shocking blow. And though Rome was not the capital at the time, it was the largest city in the world, and still the symbolic heart of the Roman Empire. And so this very much helped lead to the fall of the Western Roman Empire. It was already on its way, of course, or else this probably wouldn't have happened. It was the first time in about 800 years, I believe, since Rome had been conquered. So quite impressive stuff, right? And so the Goths, for those unaware, are the people who kind of succeeded lots of Rome, right? The Roman Empire, at least in the West. Just Germanic peoples in general did, right? You had the Angles, Saxons, Utes, Frisians, stuff like that, up in what we call England these days, up in Britannia. Then you have the Franks, of course, in France. And the Burgundians and whatnot. Vandals went down into Africa. They were in Spain for a little bit. Then you had the Visigoths, who were momentarily, they actually conquered Athens as well, and then they went to Rome, and then they ended up settling in Spain, and they ruled there for a while until getting ousted by the Umayyads, I think, what we generally call the onset of Moorish Spain, right around the 700s is when that happened. And now these Goths, most of them, when they converted to Christianity, they were Arians. And so when you have the Wulfila's Bible, Wulfila meaning little wolf in Gothic, you have an Arian Bible, which is actually older than the Vulgate, interestingly enough, by St. Jerome. And so these are Germanic-speaking people, though. So their language is, I don't want to say related to English because Latin is related to English, but Gothic is much more closely related to English because English and Gothic are both Germanic languages. Latin is not. I've studied Latin in the past, but it's very fun to study Gothic finally. So let's just get right into this presentation. And here it is. So this is the Castle of Otranto, or as we are calling it here, Bargs Atrantae. Okay, so a couple things you should notice immediately is these definite articles are just really not a thing. Much of the smaller words you wouldn't see a lot of in Gothic. I mean, it is a pro-drop language, so English kind of is too. Like you could say, "Hope you had a good day," right? And it's like, "I hope you had a good day." Obviously, right? You know what I mean? Like you don't. That's the pro-drop. You're dropping that pronoun, "I," and so like does the same thing here, but also with these definite articles. So this is the castle, Bargs, which is related to burg or borough in English, like Edinburgh, right? The capital of Scotland. That is related here, and this kind of just means fortification. There's not castle we get from, well, maybe from some version of French, or maybe some Occitan or whatever. I'm not quite sure. Probably something like Castel. And then Atrantae, which is kind of a Gothicization of Otranto, right? So if you take O's and you put them in the Gothic, they probably come out as AUs, and these borrowed AUs would sound like ah, like Otranto. Yeah. And this more specifically means of the Otrantians. So the castle of the Otrantians. And I would like to thank also for my preceptor here, Preceptor Nelson Garing, who's a great philologist, who was able to help me with some of this. And this is, of course, by, oh, sorry, none other than Horace Walpole, or here, as we call him, Horace Walpole. Horace, I tried to translate names where I could. You can't really translate Horace. Horace is presumably an Etruscan name. We don't know what it means, and so I just made it look Gothic, Horace. And then Walpole, and wall and pole are literally what Walpole means. But those are both really early borrowings into English. I didn't really have Germanic equivalents. Maybe there are some. I just couldn't find them. I'm sure I could find something for like wall, but yeah. But Gothic is missing a lot of words, as you'll kind of see as well, because again, it's only tested in the Bible, which we don't even have that whole Bible. Yeah. And so this is Wanyatha in Gustika Tungon Athwiria Hilma Halos. So this is, of course, this is the fun part before we actually get to the translation itself. This is what I found fun, because the translation was very difficult for me. Okay, it was a very interesting exercise. So Wanyatha is related to, it means turning, kind of like a turning into Gustika Tungon, which is the Gothic tongue or Gothic language. In means into in this case. So Wanyatha, I borrowed kind of from the Old English word for translation, which is winding, right? Like, which how we'd say it in modern English. And that's related to the word like went, like something you turn, you're turning, right? And so it's something you've turned into something else, right? So that doesn't have that translation meaning technically in Gothic, but I'm just going to act like it does here. And turning still makes sense, right? So they turning into the Gothic tongue, off again by Willia Hilma Hollos, which is me. So I'm Liam Hall, Willia Hilma. I believe both Willia and Hilma are attested in Gothic. You can notice actually this Hilma. A lot of these these I's are L or E's, sorry, in the other Germanic languages. So this is helm, for example, in English, and I believe it is as well, like Wilhelm or whatever, in like High German. And then Halos is actually the genitive here. Hall is not attested in Gothic. But looking at the type of noun it was, I looked at similar types of nouns from Proto-Germanic that did survive in Gothic. So, for example, rasta is rasto in Proto-Germanic. Halo is the Proto-Germanic, and I believe it probably would have become hala in the nominative, and so the genitive would have been halos. So this is Liam of the hall, essentially, right? Liam being a very much a shortened version of Wilhelma in this case, but yeah. So of the hall, that's me. It retains that O in the genitive, which is pretty interesting. Okay, and so then we have chapter 1, or Deros Ein, I think is how you'd probably say 1. This is the figure here. This is just essentially the A, B, C, Ds, right? And then they put these dots around it. So this is A, essentially. And Deros is related to the word dole. Okay, like I doled this out for you. It's a portion. It's the first portion. And so also generally when you're reading Gothic, you'll have accents were very helpful. Not if you're reading the manuscript, this is not the case. But if you're reading stuff people have put into on a book for you, basically, they'll Romanize it first off. See Dails. The Goths actually wrote in something that looked very much like Greek. It was a very modified Greek system. So it looks like this character here, this one. This is one of their letters, right? I'm not going to do that to you. I'm not going to do that to myself. And also, but they'll put accents, right? So like they put AI here, and whether that's a dios, they put the accent on the A, or if it was a deos, they put the accent on the I. That is an etymological thing. It depends on where it came from in Proto-Germanic, where it would have that accent, how you would say that. If you would go to later Gothic, regardless, this would be always said deos, right? I'm not sure because I I can't remember that etymology right now for this Delos. It might have been Dialos in like earlier Gothic. But Gothic is now dead, everyone. Like it is a dead language, so you cannot speak it. Or you can speak it, but you cannot go find a native speaker. Apparently, there were some in Crimea a few hundred years ago, but not anymore. So I'm going to bring this up just to read it, and then I'll bring the English up so you can look at it while I kind of go through it real quick. Mana fritas riksatrataye habitha enana sunuya ena dachtar so antara Nicolik scouns maras atate hun wintras was hetana machtilds. And then, of course, we have the English. Here's Manfred, Prince of Otranto, had one son and one daughter. The latter, a most beautiful virgin, aged 18, was called Matilda. So Manfredus was actually a pretty easy name to reconstruct. Most Germanic names traditionally are dithematic, which means they have two themes, right? So Mana, in this case, and Fritas. Liam is the same. It's Willia and Hilma. And there's these two words that you just kind of stick together, like Edward, Alfred, whatever, right? Mana fritas means man peace, essentially. So mana is attested, and fritas is as well. It's actually fritas normally. So this one actually shows up in names, fritas does, and mana shows up in compounds. And normally mana has two N's, but in most compounds, I notice it has one N. So I retained it with one N here. And fritas is either the US ending or AS ending. It seemed to kind of switch back and forth. I just used the AS ending here just because that's what I went with. And so Rix Otrantaye, which is, of course, ruler, prince, right, of the Otrantians, more specifically. Rix, like Theodoric, Alaric, right, we already talked about Alarix. So, I mean, like, it just means rule. It's related to the German word Reich. It's related to English reach and stuff like that. I think it's also related to, through French, the English word rich, which is power, right? Money is power, essentially. So, which came from Frankish into the French and then into English. But, and then he had Abeda. These bees in the middle of these bees in the middle, like medial bees, essentially, are a beta sound. So it's like a V, like a V with your lips, so bilabial. Voiced like I think they have it in Spanish, but we don't really have it in English. And then these D's medial as well become a voiced fricative, so the TH with the voice one, so right. So Habida, one son, of course, they are agreeing in gender, so that's why one here enana is different from ena over here. So because they have to agree with one son and then one daughter, they're not the same type of words. So these are this is a language that has gender. It has to have gender agreement. It has to have case agreement. The case is actually the hardest part for me. This sentence itself probably took me about an hour. Okay, and this is the most straightforward sentence. I only translated 3. We're going to go over a couple. So he had one son and one daughter. That's pretty straightforward. So the latter here is actually so antara. So is normally a word that means like that or those in Gothic, but it is used to mean the when translating the Bible from Greek into Gothic. Now, the Bible translation is very wooden. It's very literal. Like you can almost follow it word for word in the Greek. Just the words have been switched to Gothic, of course, right? So means the here. This is, of course, a feminine the. Antara, same with that. I think it'd be antar if it was masculine. So the second is really what this means. Antara, I believe, I'm not 100% sure on this, but it looks like it's related to the word other as well. So the other in English, or the second. Miko leaks, which leaks is related to Lee, right? Or Licha was what it would be in Old English. Mikkel is Mitchell in Old English, which means great. So greatly, because it says most here. Scounds is related to the English word sheen, like the Old English saying Alfshina or Alfshina means elf beauty, right? It's beautiful as an elf type of thing. So this is just beautiful. Scounds. It doesn't have that SK is still an SK here. Gothic is the oldest of the attested Germanic languages. It's pretty archaic as far as things are concerned. It's the closest to Proto-Germanic. So the most beautiful machas, which is a virgin. And then we have oh my goodness. Achtauthehun wintres. Achtauthehun is 18. This is a reconstruction. Winters is winters, so she's 18 winters. She's aged 18. I could have used years here. I will use that in the second sentence when that comes up, actually. This is just by analogy with 12 winters, which is when there's a scripture about talking about Jesus when he's 12, right? I believe he's teaching the learned men at the temple or whatever when he's 12, and it says he's 12 winters, right? That's when he's 12 years old. So 18 winters old, right? She was Gaetana Mathildes. So Mat is attested as far as this diatheme is concerned. Mats, just the same as Matt and Matilda. Hildes not attested. It had been Hildes, I believe, in Proto-Germanic. In Gothic, you often get that final, the IZ, you lose that I normally, you lose that vowel, whatever it is, not always I's, you generally lose the vowel, and that Z becomes unvoiced and becomes an S normally as well. So Mathildes, or Machthildes, right? So that was a little reconstruction right there. And Hetana is, I believe, related to the English word height. If you read that in I could have used name here. She was named. It would have been like Namnana or something like that. Matilda, right? And Heights though just sounded fun, right? You'd only read that really in like Arthuriana, right? I'm Height Lancelot or something like that, So yeah, she is called Matilda. Hey, we'll go to the next one. So let me read this real quick. Conrads Sasunus wastrim yeram yuchizo. Enfelths, or Unskauns, we'll talk about that in a second. Jugelauths Sukalix, Jani Gode, Gahugt Habans, Ak is was is Atens husd, Sai ni eu Atachitha, Technins Luveno Faur Mathilde. Right, and then we'll have the English up as well. Conrad the son was 3 years younger, a homely youth, sickly and of no promising disposition. Yet he was the darling of his father, who never showed any symptoms of affection to Matilda. So Conres is the son, right? Conrad. This is, again, the diathematic name. The thing about this one, about Manfred, both are attested. Matilda, one is attested. Conrad, none are attested. Neither of them are attested. So Con comes from Proto-Germanic konis. It would be cones probably or something like that. In Gothic, you drop that S because it's the first diatheme. Konzoreths just sounds weird. And then res, so from rezaz in Proto-Germanic, it's where we get the word read, which means like read a book, but also means like counsel and stuff like that. Those the is a voiced, generally becomes a D voice in this case. Which is why we have this thorn rather than a D here. You'll see it with a D in the next sentence because there's going to be a vowel between it and the S, and that is when you'd have a D there. But in this form, you just have the thorn here, which makes a TH sound. In this case, the unvoiced TH, just like in thin. So Conrad, the son, right? This is so, right, in the last sentence, but the masculine this time, sa. He was 3 years younger. Thrim Yerem Yuchizo. Enfals. So this is a interesting one. So in the English word, this is a matter of translation here. This is kind of something you have to deal with when you're translating. Enfals means simple. Unskauns means not pretty, right? This is a reconstruction as well, because this is not attested. Scouns is. Unskauns is not. So it should have an asterisk before it. But homely is a hard word to translate because it has so many different meanings. So simple is one meaning. That's the one I originally took it to mean because it's kind of an archaic book. That's kind of an archaic meaning for it. Unskauns, not ugly, would really contrast well with Matilda's beauty. I don't know. It's kind of up to you, right? In this case, I liked Anfelts, but I also wanted to show you Unskauns, which I didn't decide to go with. My preceptor, again, kind of pointed it out to me. And so I was like, that's interesting. I want to talk about that. So here we are. So he's Unfalts Jugalaus, so it's just a youth. Jungalaus, sorry, Jungalaus. So there's double G's normally make an NG sound. This is a they did the same thing in Greek at the same time. A GG made it NG normally. That's not always the case. Sometimes these double G's are actually 2 G's. You just have to know like the etymology of the word. I like the word true, which I think is trigua, I believe, in Gothic. There's double G's, and you just say it as 2 G's. So siqualix, which means sickly. It looks like sickly, and of no good disposition having, right? So he didn't have a good disposition. Goda is good. It looks like it. Disposition is gahut. And then ak, so but in this case, which yet, right? Yet, but ak, ac in Old English, ak means the same thing. Ak is was is aten. So he was his, which are these are both the pronouns he and his. They look the same in Gothic. Aten's whose. So he was his father's darling. So who's his treasure? Essentially, he was his hoard. This is who's is related to hoard. You don't have the eroticism you do in most other Germanic languages, where this z becomes an r, like it does in hoard. Right? They are related. Atens is also the word for dad, more so. You only have the word father attested once. I think it's fadar in one scripture. I don't remember which one. But they almost always use dad instead. So even when we have the Lord's Prayer, for example, they say Ata Unsar, which means our father or father are, technically. And you can see that name actually attested in Attila the Hun, right? It's Attila, which means little daddy, right? The Illa means small, like Wolfila, right? Which is Urfalas in Greek, but wolf, Urf, Ila, little. So Attila, kind of, that's obviously a nickname for him. He did have Goths serving under him, probably as a principal part of his army. So the fact that he's got this Gothic name is pretty fitting and pretty funny. So Aten's who's his father's treasure, in this case. And then, so who, and this is the relative who. It would be hua if it was for questions. But sai, which is relative who, never ni, ow means like forever, kind of. So not ever, not forever. Showed tokens of love for faur, or to here, Matilde. So just a different version of her name because where it falls in the sentence, a different case. Yeah, that's sentence number 2. And then the last sentence, which is the longest. Hey, manefretas, gahechet, luchet sunu is myth nachter, makrikis sigsie, Elizabeth, ja, si was juthan hivana from wardiana isos in manefretas, handuns, I is machi in wichtan, galiuchen, sunse conreda, un heli uslaviena. Hey, bring up the English. Manfred had contracted a marriage for his son with the Marquis of Vicenza's daughter, Isabella, and she had already been delivered by her guardians into the hands of Manfred, that he might celebrate the wedding as soon as Conrad's infirm state of health would permit. And so we have Manfred again, Manfredes. He had contracted this marriage right here. I believe this is related to the word called, right? So he'd called together, this God's togetherness, called together a marriage, Lucheth, for his son, is Sunu. I don't know why I have an accent on that. That probably shouldn't be there. Sunu with myth, myth being related to mid in English, as in like, not like middle of, like midanyerd or anything like that, but like with, so midwife, like with the wife. Dachter, which is of course daughter, and then Markarikis. This is an invention again I made up here for marquis. For those unaware, is it related to margrave kind of, or like a mark ruler? And the marks, or the marches, because we have both in English, are like the borders. They're the border areas, right? So you'd have accounts in the middle of the country maybe, and you'd have a marquee or whatever at the edge, right? These border regions are important because you potentially have some enemies on the other side of them. You need a more powerful ruler. So Marcaricus, Marca, is the march here, and Enriquez, which is again ruler, like we had before, where I used for prince. Marcaricus. Sigisie. So this is a fun one because I could actually find out the etymology on Vicenza here, which means they come from Vicenza, Italy, and which in Latin the name comes from victorious, so people who are victorious, right? Well, in Gothic, victory is sigis, so they're victorious ones. Basically, they're Victorians, which is a joke. So sigisie, so of the Victorians, kind of the marquis of the Victorians, of the victorious ones. Elizabeth. So Elizabeth, Elizabeth, right? Isabella, you might be thinking that's a little weird. Isabella is actually related etymologically to Elizabeth. It comes from Elizabeth. This just looks, Elizabeth here in Gothic looks a lot more like the Hebrew. Isabella has had more sound changes. So this Elizabeth was taken right from the Bible, right? Because there's an Elizabeth in the Bible. All right. And she was already Euthan, given, had been delivered, right? Hivana, from, by, Guardiana, her guardians, or Isos is her in this case, guardians. So her guardians, hers, Guardiana, meaning like wards, her wards, like her, right? The guardians and wards are related words, just like warden, guard just has that G sound change, which happens in like Norman French and also happened in some other Germanic dialects around that area. So she had already been delivered by her guardians in Manafrithas Handun, so his hands. That he, so he is he, that he, machi inuitan. You might have been able to use, I tried to use a subjunctive here, but it's my preceptor said it was a little too delicate, and machi, which is kind of might was actually a good idea to use. So inuitan, which is celebrate. Wichtan normally doesn't have that celebrate connotation, I believe, but it's close enough. And then gauliuchen, so this wedding, right? As soon as sunse, soon is related to soon, okay, which normally means immediately in Gothic, though. And then konreda, so we have konres again, but we have the voice back because there's something in between this. There's something after it, rather, I should say. Konreda, which this is actually more attested in Gothic. There's one word that has the redas in it, and it's garedasva, something like that. Garedava, yeah, which is, I don't remember what it means, but it's the only attestation we have it. So I knew this D would come back in this version of his name. Unheli, which means unhale, he's unhealthy, right? Infirm state of health, unhealthy, permit, right? So his unhealth would permit. Uslauvina. And that's pretty much it. So we have my sources real quick. I just slapped these on here. You should not take this as a lesson. This is not how you should do sources normally. But yeah, these are the sources though, I guess. So Castle of Otranto, Grammar of the Gothic Language by Joseph Wright. I do have a physical copy of that actually, about 100 years ago. And then this glossary, Wiktionary is very useful. And then you have the Gothic Bible online here at wolfrida.be/Gothic/browse. So that is this a little philological fun. I thought it would be fun to talk about Gothic language via a Gothic novel, the first Gothic novel. This was very difficult for me. Okay, this was very hard. I've discovered it was really hard to translate into a dead language. But it was very enjoyable. I had a very good time. It probably would have turned out better if I didn't do most of this at night, late at night after my 12-hour shifts at work. But here I am. So anyways, if you have any questions, if there's any mistakes in here, please let me know, of course. But if you have any questions, you can also leave them down below. And I thought this was fun, so hopefully you enjoyed this as well. And Liam from Liam's Lyceum, I will catch you next time.